All of these people in the panel share common traits. They have a deep sense of compassion for those who are oppressed, and they have spent years working for justice and equality. They are all leaders in the peace and justice movement. They are not afraid to openly criticize government policy.
I'm here as a part of the group of 23 peace activists that have now been subpoenaed to testify in front of a secret grand jury in Chicago. I'm also someone who has had my home raided by the FBI on September 24th. That they were looking for evidence of how the anti-war committee, funds foreign terrorist organizations, and they named quite a lot of them. Many of the people in this room have known the anti-war committee for a long time and know that we're a very sophisticated fundraising organization. We do things like take your stuff and sell it to you for a lot of money at this thing called a yard sale that happens in July or August. In the fall we have another event called Cocktails for a Cause, where we sell you incredibly overpriced appetizers and beverages. But by no means are we an organization that has the capacity to fund anyone other than ourselves. And as a matter of fact, there's some months where we can't fund ourselves. And we pass the hat at a meeting in order to scrape together the finances to pay for our own rent. Lastly, they said they were looking for evidence of who I have political relationships with in this country and in other countries. And that greatly disturbs me, because I think that freedom of association and your right to assemble are also supposed to be protected legal rights. The fact of the matter is that dissent is not terrorism, and we should not let our government label us, the 23 activists who have been subpoenaed, or the other activists that are in this room or other rooms around this country, as terrorists. We should defend the right to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people. And we should say that that doesn't make us terrorists. That makes us people who are opposing terror. It's very important right now for us to build this movement. We don't have enough people to stop the U.S. war in Afghanistan, to get the president to really pull the troops out of Iraq, to end U.S. military aid to Israel. We don't have enough people to do any of those things. We need to grow our movement. We need to not have this be a time where we start to look over each other's shoulders and whisper about each other and be in fear. And so I really think it's important that people not take the information that we were infiltrated and then use that as a time to pull back.
This is not just about us, obviously. This is about an attack on anti-war activists and international solidarity activists, and people understand that. This is meant to have a chilling effect, but obviously that is not working, because people are coming out in droves to demonstrations, to forums, to signing petitions, to getting your organizations to write solidarity statements. It's incredible. This movement may not be big enough to get the U.S. out of Afghanistan, but we're mature and savvy and unafraid. So thank you for being here. When we tell people that we are not going to testify, certainly our families and many friends, and maybe many of you in here have that same question. Well, why? You have nothing to hide. You can tell the truth. Just go ahead and testify. But it's not as simple as that. And I think I might have had that same question before I learned about grand juries. I never wanted to learn about grand juries, but most of us in this room actually remember the 50s. And certainly they were used at that time, the McCarthy era. So they can ask anything they want, which is why it's a witch hunt or a fishing expedition. And hearsay may be used. So, it's amazing that it's still used in this country, but unfortunately it is. In spite of the chilling effect that this is supposed to have on all of you, it hasn't. As I said, there's been incredible support. Meredith talked about the demonstration on that first Monday. 500 of you came out to the federal building, a couple hundred the next week. People signed petitions. We've had probably 200 solidarity statements from all kind of groups, from anti-war groups, from human rights groups.
You should all be very thankful that you had an opportunity to listen to Sarah and Meredith tonight, because now you're all witnesses to what they said about why they didn't testify in front of the grand jury and what they might say, and therefore you all can be subpoenaed to the grand jury too. And this is the type of case that I wake up at 3 a.m. thinking about these people, because I'm really afraid of what's going to happen in 3 to 4 months. But we're going to hear a lot about the word terrorism over the course, both tonight and the course of this criminal case that I think is going to be brought. And to me, that word is manipulated to identify, who you're supposed to focus on, who your political enemy is. It's not used as a word to identify who actually perpetrates violence in this world and who needs to be brought to justice. 2 days after I read about the 65-year-old being killed, I read about the demolition of the Shepherd Hotel in East Jerusalem, bought by money donated by Irving Moskowitz, a wealthy Miami businessman, who gets a tax deduction for donating that money to buy land in East Jerusalem in direct opposition to United States policy, donates tens of millions of dollars and gets a tax deduction, meaning it's our official policy to encourage that type of charitable donation. You are going to hear over the course of this case and investigation that token amounts of money were raised at lemonade stands and other things like that to make donations to the Palestinian Women's Union or other NGOs in Palestine for humanitarian purposes. And we're talking maybe a couple $1,000s. I think that's what we're going to hear about from the U.S. government. Tens of millions of dollars donated with a tax deduction does affect policy, but that's not being stopped. Again, it's about manipulating a political discussion and keeping people from standing up for Palestine, learning more about Palestine, and getting involved in a solidarity movement. And that's what this prosecution is going to be about. As of 2008, the United States government maintained a terrorist watch list that had senior officials of the African National Congress on it, including Nelson Mandela, as of 2008. And it took an act of Congress to take those people off the list. President Obama himself was an anti-apartheid activist at Columbia University when he was in college. My guess is, had this material support law been in effect then, he very likely could have been charged. Again, as we go through this process over the next couple years, you hear the government attack people for the groups that they belong to. You hear the government attack people for being terrorists. Keep in mind what you know and your own personal experience about people, how you judge them. Keep in mind what you know about U.S. history and how these laws give extraordinary power to go after political activists who are trying to change the world and make it a better place.
In a similar way, the FBI, we heard about the murder of the Black Panthers. We might also remember the FBI's role in Wounded Knee. We might also remember the massive tracking of Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement and the efforts to discredit that movement and King. And we've heard about tonight that there are similar efforts that have been underway in terms of Vietnam War protests, anti-Iraq War protests, any kind of protest. If you're a group that is resisting U.S. foreign policy, you are increasingly likely to be infiltrated. And that should be of concern to all of us. The outcome in the 1970s was to at least put up a veneer of congressional oversight to both the FBI and the CIA. And I think what we just heard from all three of the previous speakers is that that veneer now has been stripped away, and we really don't even have that anymore. We almost have a kind of a total lack of accountability and almost total impunity. I think the context is important. The context of these FBI raids, the context is part of a much broader picture, as Bruce has indicated, of the erosion of civil liberties. And what I want to suggest to you is that is the predictable outcome of living in an empire in serious decline, a militarized empire in serious decline. We are not only the most militarized country in the history of the world, we are also the most unequal country of all industrial countries in the world today. And the public policies over the past 30 years that have been pursued have been specifically designed to accelerate the pace of that inequality. So we're living in a country in serious and rapid economic decline as a result of the inequalities that is built into the system, but also as a result of the militarization that is robbing our nation of the resources that we need to actually meet essential needs. People who are willing to organize and speak out are increasingly criminalized or treated as criminals. I think of the state of Minnesota that's facing a $6 billion budget deficit over the next 2 years, and we're slashing and burning and have been for years. And yet Minnesotans will spend $32 billion for our share of the war budgets over the next 2-year period. And nobody makes those connections, but the opportunity is ripe to make them, is the dangers of engaging in strategies involved in mixed tactics.
Right.
Because mixed tactics mixed tactics in this case meaning that violent options are okay and nonviolent options are okay, and they can somehow mix together nicely. The danger in what almost always happens is that when you mix tactics, you legitimize repression against all the social forces in a country. And so the nonviolent movements who are organizing for social change are targeted viciously at the same time that the violent movements are. We're going to need to convince the majority of the U.S. people that militarization is not defense, and that in order to enhance the security of this country, we need to demilitarize.
I think it's important to understand that one of the strengths of the Twin Cities peace movement is that we have a lot of diversity of thought. We have Trotskyites, we have Marxists, we have pacifists, we have liberals, we have Greens, who all work together. When I go around the country and talk to other people, they've said that actually one of their biggest concerns is that if this prosecution is successful, that this is going to be detrimental to the anti-war movement in Minneapolis, and that will have a detrimental effect on the anti-war movement in this country. I don't think that some people in this room understand how strong our anti-war movement is in Minneapolis. I mean, repeatedly when we have protests, we are like number 3 in the country for how many people show up to our actions. And let's be honest, we're not number 3 in terms of how many people live here.
There is one instance in Chicago, actually, where a Palestinian-American professor, Abdul Halim Ashkar, was charged under the Material Support for Terrorism law. He was acquitted at trial. I got to tell you, it's really hard to be acquitted in a terrorism trial in this country, if you're Palestinian-American in particular, but he was acquitted. And so thereupon they ran him in front of a grand jury. They wanted him to name names of his contacts in Palestine, which he took, meaning that that would be passed on to Israeli security and those people would be tortured and killed. He refused to do so. He was charged with criminal contempt, for which there's no sentence. It can theoretically be up to life, and he got an 11-year sentence. 11 years for refusing to name names after you're acquitted at a criminal trial.